What you're about to hear is not the sanitized version of jungle warfare found in official after-action reports. According to declassified operational logs and first-hand sniper testimonies, some of the most dangerous encounters faced by U.S. Special Forces in Southeast Asia never involved an enemy rifle, an ambush, or an explosive trap. They involved something far older, quieter, and perfectly evolved to kill without warning. Military records and veteran interviews describe covert operations stretching through the dense border regions of Myanmar, Thailand, and Laos, where elite reconnaissance and sniper teams move through terrain that functioned like a living minefield. Every step carried weight. Every hand placed on a tree or rock carried risk. In this environment, danger didn't announce itself with noise or movement. It waited, patient and invisible, until a single mistake was enough. This is the side of special operations few are willing to discuss. Not because it lacks courage or discipline, but because it exposes how fragile even the most highly trained soldiers become when stripped of air support, medical evacuation, and the illusion of control. Out there, deep under the jungle canopy, skill with a rifle mattered far less than awareness of what you couldn't see. Veterans would later say the same thing in different words. The jungle felt alive. Not metaphorically. Literally. Leaves brushed against exposed skin like probing fingers. Vines tightened around gear as if pulling men backward. The ground shifted constantly, concealing burrows, nests, and coils beneath a carpet of wet foliage. Sweat never dried. Insect repellent washed away within hours. Cuts became infected. Vision narrowed. Hearing dulled. The air itself felt heavy, thick with rot and movement. For sniper teams, the danger multiplied. Unlike standard patrols, snipers were trained to become part of the terrain. They remained motionless for hours, sometimes days, breathing shallowly, barely blinking. That stillness was their greatest weapon against human enemies. It was also their greatest vulnerability against creatures that hunted by vibration, heat, and scent. A soldier frozen in place was no longer a predator. He was just another warm shape on the forest floor. Field manuals warned about disease. They mentioned insects. Snakes appeared as footnotes. What they never captured was the psychological pressure of knowing that death could arrive without sound, without motion, and without time to react. There would be no gunfire. No return fire. No medevac within minutes. Often, there wasn't even certainty about what had struck. Anti-venom was rarely carried deep on long-range reconnaissance missions. Identification of species took time no one had. A single wrong decision, tightening a tourniquet too much, cutting into a wound, panicking, could accelerate death instead of stopping it. And panic, in the jungle, spread faster than venom. Snipers learned to fear the quiet moments more than contact with the enemy. Reaching down to adjust a boot. Leaning against a tree during a slow crawl. Sliding a hand forward through leaves you hadn't personally cleared. Those were the moments when nature struck. Silent. Sudden. Fatal. Across after-action reports and oral histories, the same pattern emerges. Routine patrols transformed instantly into medical emergencies. Men trained to calculate wind drift and heart rate suddenly found themselves counting seconds, watching limbs go numb, wondering if they would make it back to friendly lines before their body shut down. In this environment, danger didn't chase. It waited. It blended in. It let discipline work against survival. What follows is a sequence of escalating encounters drawn from real operations, each one more psychologically devastating than the last. Creatures that didn't warn, didn't retreat, and didn't care about uniforms or rank. They were already there, long before the war arrived. And it begins with the most common terror faced by jungle snipers, the coiled strike hidden beneath a simple trail, where one careless step could inject a toxin capable of collapsing lungs, shutting down muscles, and leaving an elite soldier helpless in the undergrowth. This is where the real war began. The first threat most snipers learned to fear was not the enemy's perimeter or an unseen sentry. It was the ground itself. Trails that looked untouched, even inviting, often concealed coils of muscle and fangs perfectly aligned with the natural geometry of roots and leaves. In Southeast Asian jungles, many venomous snakes did not flee from vibrations. They froze. They trusted camouflage more than speed. And that trust was usually rewarded. Veteran accounts describe the moment of realization not as pain, but as confusion. A boot comes down. There is a soft resistance, almost like stepping on wet rope. Then a sharp impact, fast enough that the brain struggles to identify it. By the time the soldier looks down, the snake is already gone, sliding back into vegetation that seals behind it as if nothing had happened. Seconds later, the body begins to betray itself. Venom in this environment was not uniform. Some toxins attacked the nervous system, shutting down muscle control with terrifying precision. Others destroyed tissue, causing swelling so severe that boots had to be cut away within minutes. Snipers described watching their own limbs become foreign objects, heavy and unresponsive, while their minds remained clear enough to understand exactly what was happening. There was no immediate solution. No helicopter coming. No medic with a stocked trauma kit just meters away. In many long-range reconnaissance missions, teams operated under the assumption that if someone was bitten deep in enemy territory, evacuation might take days, not hours. Sometimes it wouldn't come at all. The psychological effect was immediate and lasting. Snipers were trained to control heart rate, breathing, and stress under fire. Snakebite rendered all of that useless. The body reacted on its own schedule. Pulse spiked. Vision narrowed. Nausea set in. The jungle seemed to close in, pressing down as teammates debated options in whispers, knowing that any delay could mean systemic shutdown. One former Special Forces marksman recalled lying prone after a bite, ordered not to move, listening to insects crawl across his face while paralysis crept upward from his foot. He could feel the venom spreading, inch by inch, like ice water inside his veins. He remembers thinking not about dying, but about being found days later, rifle still pointed down range, mission unfinished. The jungle offered no mercy in these moments. Heat accelerated toxin spread. Humidity prevented wounds from drying. Leeches gathered around swelling flesh, drawn by warmth and blood. Even extracting a wounded man risked revealing the team's position, forcing commanders to weigh one life against the survival of the entire unit. These encounters changed behavior permanently. After enough incidents, snipers stopped trusting clear ground. They probed ahead obsessively. They avoided stepping where sunlight fell in familiar patterns. They learned to recognize shapes that didn't quite belong, a curve too smooth, a texture too deliberate. But vigilance came at a cost. Mental fatigue set in faster. Sleep became lighter. Every movement required conscious effort. And still, it wasn't enough. Because snakes were only the beginning. They struck fast, yes, but at least they often left. The next threat stayed hidden longer, attacked in silence, and injected a different kind of fear. One that didn't announce itself with a strike, but with pain that arrived slowly, relentlessly, and often after it was already too late to identify the source. In the next phase of this story, we move lower to the ground, into boots, bedrolls, and bivouac sites, where scorpions and venomous arthropods turn moments of rest into sudden medical crises, and where sleep itself became a liability. If snakes ruled the trails, the ground beneath camp owned the night. For sniper teams operating deep in the jungle, rest was never safe, only necessary. When movement stopped and rifles were laid across chests, the jungle did not sleep. It adjusted. And some of its smallest inhabitants waited precisely for those moments when vigilance finally broke. Scorpions, venomous centipedes, and stinging arthropods thrived in the same dark, damp spaces snipers relied on for concealment. Inside boots left untouched for hours. Beneath ponchos stretched low to the ground. Inside rolled sleeves and web gear soaked with sweat. These creatures didn't attack out of defense or fear. They reacted to pressure, warmth, and proximity. And when they struck, the damage unfolded slowly, painfully, and without the clarity of an obvious wound. Veterans often recalled waking to pain before understanding danger. A sharp burn along the ankle. A deep, radiating ache spreading up the calf. The instinct was to move, to jerk away, but movement was exactly what could expose a hide site or compromise an overwatch position. Men were trained to endure discomfort. This was something else. This was pain that felt wrong, invasive, spreading. Scorpion venom did not usually kill healthy adults, but in the jungle it rarely acted alone. Dehydration, exhaustion, infection, and stress turned survivable stings into cascading medical problems. Muscles cramped violently. Hands shook. Vision blurred. Some men described a sensation like electricity running beneath the skin, making fine motor control impossible. For a sniper, loss of control over trigger finger and breathing rhythm was catastrophic. Centipede bites were worse. Longer fangs. Deeper penetration. Venom that caused intense swelling and tissue inflammation. In several recorded incidents, boots had to be cut open in silence, blades moving slowly to avoid metallic noise, while the bitten limb ballooned and pulse throbbed visibly beneath the skin. The jungle floor absorbed whispered curses and controlled breathing, but it never absorbed the fear. What made these encounters uniquely terrifying was the delay. Unlike a snake strike, which declared itself instantly, arthropod venom often took minutes or hours to fully manifest. Snipers lay still, waiting, unsure whether what they felt was a minor sting or the beginning of systemic collapse. There was no reliable way to know. No diagnostic tools. No second opinion. Just time stretching unbearably long. Sleep deprivation compounded everything. Teams learned that rest invited risk, but without rest, judgment eroded. Hallucinations crept in at the edges of vision. Shadows moved where nothing should. The mind began to anticipate pain before it arrived. Every itch felt like a warning. Every brush against fabric sparked a spike of adrenaline. Psychologically, these encounters rewired behavior. Snipers began checking and rechecking their gear compulsively. Boots were shaken out obsessively, even when movement risked detection. Gloves stayed on longer than comfort allowed. Some men chose to endure numbness and sweat rather than expose skin for even a moment. The jungle responded by tightening its grip, turning simple acts into calculated risks. And still, the danger escalated. Because above the ground and below it, there was another threat that few expected and even fewer survived without consequence. One that didn't rely on fangs or stingers alone, but on the environment itself to deliver poison through contact, inhalation, and infection. A threat that blurred the line between animal attack and environmental collapse. That is where this story goes next. Beyond fangs and stingers, the jungle possessed a more insidious weapon, one that rarely appeared in reports because it didn't look like an attack at all. It blended seamlessly into water, skin, breath, and time. For snipers operating deep in Southeast Asia, this threat was the most unpredictable of all, because it didn't announce itself as an enemy. It arrived quietly, masquerading as fatigue, irritation, or a minor wound, until it was already embedded deep inside the body. Contact was often enough. Veterans described moving through shallow streams to mask scent and sound, water rising to the waist, sometimes the chest. The water felt cool at first, almost comforting in the suffocating heat. Minutes later, leeches attached themselves in clusters, slipping past fabric, into folds of skin, between toes, behind knees. They were painless at first. That was the danger. Anticoagulants kept blood flowing freely, turning small attachment points into persistent wounds that refused to close. Left untreated, those wounds became entry points. Bacteria thrived in the jungle. Fungal spores hung in the air. Microscopic parasites lived in soil and water. A scratch from a branch, a leech bite, a blister softened by constant moisture could all become gateways to systemic infection. Snipers recalled watching red lines creep outward from wounds, tracking veins like maps, while fever set in and strength drained away day by day. Some creatures amplified this effect. Toxic amphibians, insects coated in irritants, caterpillars whose hairs embedded venom into exposed skin. A simple brush against foliage could result in hours of burning pain, swelling, and disorientation. In the dark, it was impossible to know what had caused it. Only that the body was reacting violently to something unseen. Breathing became another risk. In certain low-lying areas, spores and airborne toxins irritated lungs already strained by humidity and exertion. Men reported coughing fits they couldn't suppress, chests tightening, oxygen feeling suddenly scarce. For a sniper lying motionless, unable to cough freely without revealing position, every breath became a calculated struggle between silence and survival. The psychological toll of these slow attacks was profound. Unlike a bite or sting, there was no clear moment to point to, no instant when danger could be identified and confronted. The enemy was gradual, ambiguous. The mind turned inward, monitoring every sensation obsessively. Was the dizziness dehydration or something worse? Was the fever from exertion, or was something spreading inside? Isolation magnified everything. Deep reconnaissance teams often operated knowing that extraction might be impossible if compromised. Radios failed. Weather closed in. Friendly lines felt impossibly far away. In those moments, the jungle stopped feeling like terrain and started feeling like a closed system, one that absorbed strength and returned fear. Several veterans later admitted that these experiences haunted them more than firefights. Bullets were external. These threats felt intimate, invasive. They attacked the body quietly, turning it against itself while the mind stayed awake long enough to understand what was happening. And still, the escalation wasn't over. Because the final threat combined everything that came before. Pain, paralysis, fear, isolation. It struck without sound, often without witnesses, and left scars that followed snipers long after they left the jungle behind. Not all of them physical. That final encounter is where this story ends. The final threat did not always come from a single creature. It emerged when exhaustion, venom, infection, and fear converged into one irreversible moment. For some snipers, it was a delayed reaction to an earlier bite that suddenly accelerated days later. For others, it was a body pushed past its limit by dehydration, fever, and stress, finally shutting down in the middle of hostile terrain. The jungle didn't need to strike again. It simply waited. Veterans described moments when coordination vanished without warning. Hands that had once adjusted scopes with surgical precision began to tremble uncontrollably. Vision narrowed into tunnels. Sounds distorted. The body felt distant, unreliable, as if commands from the brain arrived too late or not at all. In those moments, elite training offered no solution. There was no drill for systemic collapse miles behind enemy lines. Some men were evacuated just in time, lifted out weak, delirious, and permanently changed. Others were carried by teammates who risked exposure with every step, knowing that stopping meant death. And some never made it out. Their stories exist only in fragments, in after-action notes stripped of emotion, or in the memories of the men who survived and never fully explained what they saw. The psychological damage lingered long after the jungle was left behind. Many snipers returned home with heightened vigilance that never faded. Sleep became light and restless. The sensation of something crawling on skin triggered instant panic. Silence, once a tactical ally, became oppressive. Nature itself no longer felt neutral. It felt hostile, watchful. What makes these encounters so difficult to process is that they lacked meaning in the traditional sense of war. There was no enemy intent, no strategy to decode, no victory to claim. Pain arrived without purpose. Death without drama. Survival without celebration. The jungle simply enforced its rules, indifferent to flags, ranks, or missions. These stories rarely appear in official histories because they don't fit the narrative of combat. But for the men who lived them, they were as real and as defining as any firefight. They reshaped how snipers understood vulnerability, control, and the true cost of operating unseen and unsupported. The jungle war was not only fought with rifles and radios. It was fought against heat, silence, venom, infection, and the slow erosion of certainty. And those who endured it paid a price that extended far beyond the end of their deployment. Remember these men. Not just for what they faced from the enemy, but for what they endured when no one was watching. If this story gave you a deeper understanding of the hidden cost of war, consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. These are the stories that deserve to be remembered.